Time constraints, so we will have to begin without everyone. I am Robert Bell. I'm the moderator of this panel, and I'm not going to say very much about myself other than that last year I proposed a project, Volt Gas Volt, with Corinne Lepage, a way to solve the intermittency problem of energy, and that's it. That's the last you'll hear about that today. The subject today is the risks associated with shale gas, gaz de schiste, and nuclear, the financial risks primarily. And so I am going to frame that a little bit, take advantage of my position here and frame that. I should hold it at the same spot all the time? Okay. I'm new to this microphone business. Anyway, I'm going to frame that in terms of the basic risks for each of these topics. For example, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the GIEC en français, said that the planet, the human race, has to reduce the amount of CO2 that it is pumping into the atmosphere by somewhere between 40 and 70% within about 35 years. Reduce it from 2010 levels. Or we won't be able to hold the temperature to the number that you've all seen discussed, 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And nobody knows what happens if we go above that. We could really very seriously be cooked. So that is the story. That's the main risk with CO2. Now, can that risk be addressed with nuclear? Well, maybe. A lot of people think it could be. Right now, but let me dimension that risk as well. What it would mean if nuclear actually were the solution to the CO2 problem. Because as you know, nuclear reactors don't actually, once they're on, put out any CO2. Right now, there are about 435 functioning nuclear reactors. They are producing less than 3% of the net energy consumption, final energy consumption. That is, the amount of energy that's left after you subtract the energy you need to produce the energy, less than 3%. So if nuclear were to be the solution, which maybe it is, we would have to multiply that 3% figure by, that is the number of reactors producing 3%, we'd have to multiply that by 30. 30. Imagine that. Some 13,000 nuclear reactors. 4 of the ones that have been built, the less than 600, I think is the number, have already blown up. So that's the risk with nuclear. We could only do a percentage, say 30% of energy, then of all energy. Because remember, what we have to do is get rid of the CO2. So we could do 30% of all final energy consumption. That would still be 4,000 reactors. Okay. Can it be addressed by shale gas? Now, we have next to me one of the world's authorities on that subject, and next to her, a journalist who has done extensive research. I'll introduce our panelists in a minute. But here's the problem. About 2 weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago, the agency in the United States that's in charge of the statistics that claims that how much how much shale gas is out there, how much shale oil is out there, not just in the United States, but in much of the world. They have apparently addressed this. One of our panelists will explain how they have addressed this. The biggest shale formation in the United States is in California. It's known as the Monterey Shale. And it was supposed to have contained a bonanza of recoverable shale oil. over 13 billion barrels worth of recoverable oil. This was to change the entire equation of oil power in the world. 2 weeks ago, they said, oh, we have a teensy-weensy little problem with that. We have to reduce it from 13 billion barrels to 600 million barrels. In other words, they wrote it down by 96%. Okay, let me introduce. So now we see, based on that, maybe this question of shifting into shale oil and shale gas may not be all that it has been claimed to be. We will look into that. Now, the panel, I was with that protocol, would have required that I introduce, first of all, Senator Chantal Joannou. Normally in the United States, a senator on a panel like this gets the first word and the last word, and most of the words in between. But Senator Joannou will only get the last word if she turns up at all. Apparently she's a bit late. Okay, so now I move to the panelists who are, in fact, here, and next to me, next to me is really the world's authority on the financial aspects of shale gas and shale oil, Deborah Rogers. She is the executive director of the Energy Policy Forum. She started out in London as an investment banker, and then 2008 to 2011 was on the advisory council for the Federal Reserve in Dallas, in Texas. In 2013, she testified before under oath at testimony there, before the U.S. Senate Committee. Okay, great. So she testified before the U.S. Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. Now, all you have to do to look at what she has to say, and I strongly urge you to do this, is simply Google her name, Deborah Rogers, and shale gas, and see what comes up. You will not curse me for that advice. Okay, so next to Deborah is a distinguished freelance journalist who has written for La Parisienne, Marianne, and has spent 4 years on the shale and oil gas story. He, in the 2012 French presidential election, you'll recall people were following fact-checking. Well, this is the guy who did most of the setups on that. He's here because he has reported and researched extensively on shale and gas in Poland and Algeria, 2 places that supposedly are a new hope for shale oil and gas. We will see what his investigations have revealed. We also have Kosuke Okahara. Now, Kosuke Okahara is a photographer. He's an award-winning photographer. He's won an award from the Getty Images organization. His pictures of it exhibited at the Musée de Quai de Branly in Rotterdam, at the Kunststadt Museum. That's not why he's here. He is here because he is an eyewitness to one of the most tragic events in recent times with nuclear Fukushima. Probably he's the only one at this entire conference who has actually been to Fukushima in the exclusion zone. He's been there, he's been around Fukushima maybe 20 times. He went on his own originally. Newspapers such as the New York Times, Courrier International heard about that, and they sent him back on assignment. You know, these guys wearing those white suits with the things? That was him in some cases, but he's gone back without that. So we will have the testimony of what can really go wrong if nuclear goes wrong. In terms of risk, that we need to know. So that's the whole panel. We're going to start with Deborah, and what she's about to say reminds me a little bit of Mark Twain's definition of what she's going to say about shale oil and shale gas reminds me a little bit of Mark Twain's definition of a silver mine. He said a silver mine is a hole in the ground with two liars standing above it. So, Deborah.
Thank you very much for having me here today. This is such a lovely place. It's a real treat to get to come. I am going to give you the view of shales from a financial perspective from about 30,000 feet, and I'm going to move very, very quickly because there's a lot of information, a lot of aspects to this, so hang on for the ride. In 2013, we began to see the second round of significant write-downs in shale assets amongst shale companies in the U.S. These were very significant write-downs, not unusual to be $2 billion a quarter in some cases. And in total, amongst about the top 15 shale operators, $35 billion was written off. And so you have to ask the question at that point. I'm sorry, what? You have to ask the question at that point, why is this happening? Well, if you go in and you look at the financials of these companies, you'll find that they were spending much more on capital expenditure than they were taking in. In other words, the wells weren't making money. They have run negative cash flow for consistently, without exception, since 2009. So for every dollar that they were spending, for every $4 that they were spending to drill and complete wells, they were making $1 typically, which of course doesn't work. At some point, you're going to hit a financial wall and people are going to stop giving you money. So it begs the question, what are the underlying fundamentals of this, and why is this failing financially? If you go in and you look at various aspects, such as jobs creation, we've heard a lot from industry about jobs creation. They have claimed to have created thousands upon thousands of jobs in the U.S. This hasn't been the case, actually. We went in, a lot of their job numbers that they gave us have been based on economic models. And anybody who's taken Economics 101 knows that economic models are only as good as their inputs. In other words, you can reverse engineer an economic model to say pretty much anything you want it to say. And so we went in and started taking a look at some of their economic models. And what we found was quite interesting. Some of the jobs that they claim that they were going to create included things like strippers and prostitutes in the mix. Now, admittedly, that's job creation, but it's not the sort of job creation that you or I think of when we hear these glowing jobs numbers. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to get away from all those peripheral jobs and just concentrate on how many people are actually being employed by the oil and gas industry. And what we found was there were about 181,000 direct industry jobs. And so then we went in and we looked at the renewables, just to do a comparison, and we only considered wind, solar, and geothermal. And we found that renewables had created about 183,000 direct industry jobs. So you had roughly the same number of jobs. But you can't stop there. You've got to do further comparisons. And so we went in to look to see how much of electricity generation capacity does oil and gas contribute to. And it's about 45% in the United States, whereas renewables are a mere 15% at this point. So as you can see, renewables are actually creating many, many more jobs per kilowatt capacity than oil and gas. And I personally think this is an interesting fact that has not been lost on the oil and gas industry. They understand they're not keeping up with job creation against renewables, and they feel it necessary to claim extraordinary jobs numbers. Then we went in and we looked at recovery efficiencies of shale wells. Now, what I mean by that is pretty simple. In old-fashioned oil and gas wells, what we call conventional wells, you would do your geology. This is a very simplistic explanation, but you would do your geology. You would identify a sea or a pool of gas. You would drop your vertical wellbore in, and you would take that oil or gas out. And typically, you could get 75 to 80% of oil or gas in place out of the ground. With shales, you get about 6.5%. 6.5%. So even though you hear these great numbers, like there's 14 trillion cubic feet of gas in the Marcellus or some other shale play, if you can only get 6.5% of that out, it really doesn't do you much good. We also looked at energy returned on energy invested. And what I mean by that is how many barrels of oil do you have to expend to get a barrel of oil out? In the early days of crude in the United States, you would expend 1 barrel of oil to get about 100 barrels out. Crude today in the U.S., 1 barrel to get 11 barrels out. But when you start getting into these unconventionals like tar sands and shales, in tar sands you expend 1 barrel to get a mere 3 barrels of crude out. And with tight oil, we're still doing the work on that, but it looks like it's going to come in at about 1 barrel to get 5 barrels out. So as you can see, what we've done is we've moved away from the easy to extract and abundant hydrocarbons into much more difficult to extract, much more expensive to extract hydrocarbons. And this is problematic going forward. Another thing that we looked at were externalities of shales. Now, there are a number of externalities. There's air pollution, which turned out to be quite significant. In my area where I live, in Texas, in the Barnett Shale, our air pollution, and I live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, by the way, which is a very large metropolitan area, and our air pollution literally doubled in a mere 6 years when they added the drilling on top of everything else. Drilling now creates more pollution than all the cars, trucks, and airplanes combined in the region. But one of the most interesting externalities to me has been road damages. The industry likes to tell us that they generate enormous amounts of severance tax revenue, which is the tax revenue from extracting the minerals. And indeed they do. They do pay a lot in severance taxes. The only problem is that the externalities that they're creating don't even begin or are far outpacing the amount of tax revenue that's being brought in. Just to give you a couple of quick examples, if you look at North Dakota and the Bakken Shale, the revenue that North Dakota has taken in has been about $3.3 billion since 2010, which sounds like a lot of money. The only problem is road damages alone are running at $7 billion, according to North Dakota Department of Transportation. In Texas, the revenue in 2012 is $3.6 billion. That was for all oil and gas production onshore and offshore in Texas. But the road damages are estimated just from drilling onshore at $4 billion. So again, there's a problem. The majors, believe it or not, the majors have been struggling for over a decade to materially grow reserves. They have not been able to grow reserves in any way or in any material way for over a decade. So shale has been very attractive to them. That was one of the reasons they went in and started picking up shale assets a few years ago, because we had an unusual rule change from the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, which allowed them to book reserves, an expanded definition of reserves. And because they could do that, they could book shale reserves. They did not necessarily have to have them independently verified, and they could go into the capital markets and borrow more monies based on these numbers. We now know that those numbers were significantly inflated by shale companies. Shale operators have estimated that reserves are a minimum of 100% greater than they truly are in all the shale plays, and in some of the plays in the U.S., they overestimated reserves by as much as 400% to 500%. Now that's problematic because they've gone in and they've borrowed monies on assets that either do not exist or will never be commercially viable to extract. We hear a lot about shale exportation. The reason for, in the U.S., we were told that the reason they wanted to do shale extraction to begin with was to provide us energy independence. That was a ridiculous notion, as anybody who works in oil and gas truly knew. But it played very well in our current political environment with the average voter. Shale exportation is actually being pursued because of the spreads. If you look at our domestic price for shale gas in the U.S., it's roughly around $4.50 to $5 right now. But these companies can extract, pipe, refine, and ship the gas to Asia and get paid as much as $18 to $20. So they're trying to capture that spread. I'm sorry, I gave you the wrong number. They can extract, pipe, and refine, ship to Asia for about $9, but get paid $18 to $20. So there's a $9 to $11 spread there that they're trying to capture, and that's very lucrative. So obviously, it's very attractive if you're an oil and gas operator. In conclusion, I'll leave you with a quick statistic of what you can expect when shale comes to town. If you take the city of Fort Worth, my hometown, and you look at the economic benefits that we've received, and then you compare that to the environmental degradation, the air pollution, et cetera, I think these statistics give you kind of a clear picture of that. And I could give you numbers like this over and over and over from every shale play in the U.S. So here we go. In 2008, my hometown received about $50 million in revenues from a mere 44 shale gas wells. Sounds great. We were all told that we were going to be shale-yonaires. No kidding, that was the term the oil and gas industry used. But by 2012, a mere 4 years later, those revenues had dropped over 50% to a mere $23 million, but we now have about 400 shale wells just within the city proper, on city land. So that is the tale of shales right there. You get...
We have to stop.
Okay, sorry. Thank you.
I have a quick question for you. Could you please explain why so many companies have jumped in on this thing and why they keep producing at a loss? We know that they are losing because Rex Tillerson, CEO of Exxon, said they were. The CEO of Total has acknowledged that they were losing money. The CEO of Shell Oil has acknowledged that they were losing money. Could you please explain why?
Yes, there was a lot of money, an enormous amount of money chasing yield on Wall Street. Our interest rates have been so low for so long, and everybody's looking for a better return. And shale was a very sexy story, and so Wall Street was willing to throw a lot of money at it. If you're a CEO of a company, you're not going to turn down money. Unfortunately, they have not been able to produce good financial results, and you saw a 50% drop in mergers and acquisition fees to Wall Street in 2013, and you saw an over 90% decline in private equity monies going into shales. So in other words, the large institutional investors are very quietly exiting by the back door.
So is this a classic bubble where the initial investors are selling on to what is known in the trade as the greater fool?
I believe so. If you look at the bond issuance recently, primarily it's been the smaller investors that have gone into it, and they are snapping up the bonds left, right, and center. To me, that's a classic sign of the height of an investment cycle. You're going to see a downturn from here.
Thank you very much. That was amazingly interesting. Now we go on to Sylvain.
Ok. Alors, ça arrive. Vraiment, ça arrive. Donc je pense que le plus simple est que je parle en français, peut-être. le plus simple pour moi en tout cas. Je ne sais pas si c'est plus simple pour vous. Alors j'ai été très intéressé par l'exposé de Deborah Rogers. Je vais parler pour ma part plutôt de l'autre côté de l'Atlantique, où la situation évolue beaucoup plus vite que pourrait nous le laisser croire la couverture médiatique, notamment sur la question des gaz de schiste. À titre d'exemple, en préparant cette conférence, je me disais que j'allais parler de la Pologne, de l'Argentine, de l'Algérie. Et il se trouve que hier, Reuters a émis une dépêche annonçant que le gouvernement allemand comptait rompre l'accord de coalition qui avait été passé par Angela Merkel interdisant la technique de fracturation hydraulique nécessaire à l'extraction des gaz de schiste afin de préparer une loi qui autoriserait l'utilisation de cette technique en Allemagne à des fins d'extraction des gaz de schiste. Donc la situation évolue de jour en jour et notamment elle évolue du fait de pseudo-exemples qu'on va piocher un petit peu partout et de préférence dans des pays qui n'ont pas trop le choix. Je vais commencer par la Pologne, où je me suis rendu à la fin de l'année dernière pour un reportage pour le Parisien Magazine, et qui m'était vanté de manière quasi unanime comme le paradis des gaz de schiste. Alors le paradis des gaz de schiste, il faut savoir que c'est une forêt grande comme la moitié de la Bretagne, dans le nord-ouest du pays, près de la côte baltique. C'est la région de Poméranie. Sauf que la région de Poméranie, aujourd'hui, les créations d'emplois concrets, c'est 5 types qui se relaient pour garder 12 plateformes, en gros. La seule entreprise qui bénéficie actuellement en termes d'emploi des gaz de schiste en Pologne est une entreprise de gardiennage. Parce que tous les emplois sur place sont en fait des emplois de compagnies pétrolières, étrangères principalement, ainsi que des emplois de sous-traitants. L'exemple type, ce sont les grandes entreprises qu'on connaît pour la plupart, de services pétroliers type Halliburton, Schlumberger, Baker Hughes, etc., qui font le forage et le fracking elles-mêmes. Donc le bénéfice en termes d'emploi pour les locaux est quasiment nul. Comme je vous l'ai dit, c'est 5-10 mecs dans le nord-ouest qui gardent les plateformes avec un uniforme et un talkie-walkie, ce qui n'est pas vraiment ce qu'on nous promet en termes de retombées économiques et sociales pour la France. Alors, il y a cette faible création d'emplois et il y a également les coûts exorbitants, parce que la plupart des compagnies sont privées, mais le projet est embrassé profondément par les autorités. Et quand j'ai demandé pourquoi toutes ces compagnies avaient été autorisées de manière si massive, on parle ici d'un tiers du territoire ouvert à l'exploration pour les gaz de schiste, un tiers du territoire de la Pologne, hein, pas de la Poméranie, la réponse qui m'a été donnée, c'est « vous n'avez pas idée de combien ça coûte ». Un puits d'exploration de gaz de schiste en Pologne, c'est 10 à 15 millions de dollars. Selon les experts que j'ai interrogés, en l'occurrence des entreprises qui forent là-bas, affiner cette technique demandera au bas mot une centaine de forages juste sur le territoire polonais, de façon notamment à comprendre la structure géologique et voir si la technique de fracturation hydraulique telle qu'elle est employée aux États-Unis, puisqu'ils l'importent directement, est appropriée. Le seul petit problème, c'est qu'elle n'est pas appropriée du tout. Les retombées actuellement sont très mauvaises. Les puits qui réussissent à produire sortent vaguement quelques milliers de pieds cubes par jour, ce qui n'est absolument pas économique. Et ils réalisent que ce sont encore des années et des années et des années qui vont être nécessaires pour affiner ces techniques. Pour mémoire, ça fait 4 ans qu'il y a des forages en Pologne de manière active et avec beaucoup de promesses qui ont été faites derrière, et beaucoup n'ont pas été tenues. Il faut savoir qu'au niveau des territoires, les principales promesses dans le village où j'ai été, ça a été de faire refaire les fenêtres de l'école. C'est un petit peu arrivé avec de la verroterie pour les Indiens, en l'occurrence, que de promettre ça. Ce qui est rigolo, c'est de savoir que ça n'a même pas été fait. Il y a toujours les camions qui passent, le forage continue, mais ces contreparties ne sont jamais arrivées. Et là où le gouvernement polonais a commencé à se retrouver un petit peu pris à la gorge, c'est que les estimations ont été refaites. Alors j'ai repris les chiffres. Les premières estimations avaient été faites par la European Information Agency, donc qui est l'agence gouvernementale américaine qui fait des estimations sur les réserves de gaz de schiste au niveau global. Et ces réserves étaient évaluées à 5 300 milliards de mètres cubes. Ça, c'était en avril 2011. Un an plus tard, l'Institut géologique polonais et l'Union des géologues des États-Unis, l'USGS, a revu l'estimation à 1920 milliards de mètres cubes, ce qui est beaucoup moins, avec une hypothèse conservatrice de 346 à 768 milliards de mètres cubes qu'on peut extraire. Donc on revient à ce que disait Deborah Rogers, à savoir qu'il ne faut pas se fantasmer, les réserves théoriques n'ont aucune valeur. Ce qui est important, c'est ce qu'on appelle le recoverable, ce qu'on peut récupérer. Et en l'occurrence, on est sur un rapport de 1 à 100 la plupart du temps. 1 à 100, j'exagère, 1 à 20, mais c'est déjà pas mal. Le seul problème, c'est que le gouvernement polonais, lui, avait fait des grosses promesses à ses administrés, notamment que du fait du solde migratoire négatif en Pologne, il n'y a plus de jeunes pour payer la retraite des vieux. Et la promesse qui a été faite, quand je m'arrêtais dans la rue à Varsovie pour demander aux gens qu'est-ce que vous pensez des gaz Lubkov et les gaz de schiste, ils me disaient ah oui, c'est le truc pour payer les retraites. L'argument géopolitique concernant la Russie n'arrivait qu'au deuxième rang, parce que c'est une vision très ouest européenne que d'imaginer qu'ils ont la Russie en tête. Il y a des partis qui ménagent très clairement la chair et le chou avec la Russie qui est de l'autre côté de la frontière, hein, pour mémoire. Donc, diversifier les approvisionnements, certes, mais se passer totalement de la Russie, ils ne l'envisagent pas. Par ailleurs, aujourd'hui, tout militant anti-gaz de schiste en Pologne se voit immédiatement taxé d'être subventionné par Gazprom, ce qui est assez amusant quand on sait que la moitié des entreprises qui forent pour les gaz de schiste en Pologne sont en fait des filiales de Gazprom. On a une situation qui est assez comparable en Algérie. Alors, en Algérie, pour mémoire là encore, les ressources de gaz naturel classiques sont évaluées à 159, alors là, prenez vos calculatrices, 159 000 milliards de pieds cubes, donc TCF, Trillion Cubic Feet. Donc pour ceux qui sont un peu matheux, pour convertir en mètres cubes, vous multipliez par 28 et ça vous donne le nombre de milliards de mètres cubes, c'est fastoche. Donc 159 Tera Cubic Feet. Il faut savoir que les réserves de gaz de schiste, qui sont estimées comme étant les troisièmes au monde, sont autour de 700 TCF, 700 Trillion Cubic Feet. Donc 4 fois et demi les réserves conventionnelles. C'est énorme, notamment dans le champ de Belkin, qui est à cheval sur l'Algérie et la Libye, c'est énorme. Le seul problème, c'est que c'est surtout vital. Et des accords ont été passés entre la France et l'Algérie pour expérimenter la fracturation hydraulique. Pourquoi c'est vital ? Parce que là encore, le gouvernement a fait des promesses. La société Sonatra, qui détient 80% des titres miniers en Algérie, est le principal bailleur de fonds de l'État et de la politique sociale de l'État. Et c'est un avis qui est largement partagé et qui a été très débattu pour la présidentielle en Algérie, pas en France, hein, parce que voilà, on respecte nos voisins et on ne va pas aborder les sujets qui fâchent, surtout quand on a des contrats d'approvisionnement sur 15 ans. Si demain, il n'y a plus de gaz, c'est la seule chose, la fin du gaz en Algérie est la seule chose qui peut faire tomber le gouvernement de manière durable. Parce que demain, s'il n'y a plus de gaz, on ne paye plus les fonctionnaires, on ne paye plus les pensions, on ne paye plus les retraites, on ne paye plus rien. Le système social algérien repose sur une énorme bulle de gaz, sans mauvais jeu de mots. Et finalement, cette bulle de gaz est également ce qui est apparu en Ukraine. Je vous renvoie à un article qui a été publié le 10 avril 2014 dans Le Guardian, où Naomi Klein a appliqué sa théorie du choc à l'Ukraine en disant qu'aujourd'hui, la situation en Ukraine était une opportunité de rêve pour les producteurs de gaz de schiste américains, car c'était l'ouverture d'un débouché formidable, puisque de justification géopolitique, on ne va quand même pas se plier devant l'ours russe, formidable pour trouver un débouché pour leur gaz de schiste à des prix, là encore, défiant toute concurrence. On est plutôt dans les 12-15 dollars sur le prix européen du gaz à l'unité. Donc, ce choc est une très bonne légitimation de l'exploitation des gaz de schiste. Mais il y a un autre choc qui est en place et que tente de mettre en place le gouvernement britannique, là encore pour tenir ses promesses, c'est un choc fiscal. Le chancelier George Osborne a proposé en juillet 2013 des réductions d'impôts importantes, qui vont d'ailleurs peut-être être condamnées par l'Union européenne, ce qui est très rigolo, des réductions d'impôts importantes pour stimuler l'exploitation des gaz de schiste. Et c'est là où on arrive à, entre guillemets, la fin de la boucle. Si je dis ça, c'est parce que les gaz de schiste aujourd'hui ne sont pas rentables. Tous les éléments apportés par Deborah Rogers le montrent. Néanmoins, toutes les justifications qui sont apportées pour les exploiter sont soit géopolitiques, soit sociales, sur des bases totalement biaisées, enfin, à moins que vous souhaitiez devenir gardien de phare à côté d'un forage, soit sur des justifications économiques qui, là encore, sont très, très limites. Par contre, ils ont une formidable histoire à raconter. Et cette formidable histoire a eu un succès tel que, il y a quelques mois de ça, c'était en novembre 2013, Monsieur Mestralet, donc le PDG de GDF, a déclaré sur la radio BFM Business qu'il était temps que l'Europe cesse de subventionner les énergies renouvelables, car étant donné la manne d'énergie non conventionnelle, d'hydrocarbures non conventionnels disponibles à des prix compétitifs, nous étions en train de distordre le marché de l'énergie en Europe et d'ouvrir notre porte aux importations de charbon à bas prix venues des États-Unis. Oui, parce que la blague aussi, c'est que les mines de charbon n'ont pas été fermées aux États-Unis. Au contraire, on les garde ouvertes pour les exporter vers la Chine. Et vous vérifierez, aujourd'hui, il y a d'énormes shipping qui partent directement pour les centrales à charbon de Chine qui, pour mémoire, représentent 25% des émissions de gaz à effet de serre dans le monde. Donc, pour qu'un patron d'une entreprise du CAC 40, productrice de gaz, se permette de dire, en gros, quelque chose d'aussi impopulaire que « stoppons les subventions aux énergies renouvelables, nous distordons la concurrence du marché de l'énergie », eh bien, je pense que nous avons dépassé clairement une limite dans le débat et qu'aujourd'hui, il y a une confiance qui est de pure apparence chez les industriels au regard des performances économiques réelles de ces nouvelles énergies. Et je finirai avec un petit proverbe du Dakota du Nord qu'on m'a dit quand on a parlé des gaz de schiste et qui explique beaucoup de choses sur le débat actuellement en France autour d'une nouvelle technique non polluante. Ce petit proverbe, c'est que durant la ruée vers l'or, la seule personne qui était sûre de se faire du fric, quoi qu'il arrive, dans la mine en question, c'était celui qui vendait des pioches.
Thank you very much. That was great. So it appears that it's the same story in the United States and in Poland and more or less in Algeria. I think we did not explain why gaz de schiste isn't actually profitable in the United States. It is simply that wherever you drill, pretty much with hydraulic fracturing, you get some gas. So there is suddenly a lot of people jumping in, producing the gas. The supply, the offer of gas goes way up, so the price goes way down. Now, in the middle of this, our fourth panelist arrived, Senator Chantal Joannou. And I would like to give a brief introduction for her before then we'll go on to Kosuke. But as Chantal is here, all right, we've all heard about the events May 1968 in France. Senator Joannou missed them because she was born in 1969. She is a graduate of the Sorbonne, Sciences Po, and ENA. She actually wrote former President Sarkozy's speeches when he was running a department. She was, in 2003, she was responsible for sustainable development as, and then chef de cabinet when Sarkozy was at Hauts-de-Seine. And then she participated in his 2007 presidential campaign. Did you write the speeches for that? No. Oh, okay. She negotiated the Grenelle d'Environnement and was president of ADEME. She was the Secretary of State for Ecology and then the Minister of Sport. And then in 2011, she was elected in her own right Senator for Paris. At that point, she did something really unusual. She switched parties. She left the UMP and joined the UDE, the party of Borloo. Now, we will be hearing from Chantal in a minute, but first, we are going to get Chantal will be able to talk about both gaz de schiste and nuclear. So I would like, and as she's a senator, I would like her to have the last word on this panel. So let's hear from Kosuke Okahara, an eyewitness to Fukushima.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me here. It's a really beautiful place, and then thanks for coming. Well, I had very nice, good wine last night. It was very difficult to get up, but I made it. You made it. Appreciate. I don't talk much about numbers here, so it's not complicated. But I like you to kind of travel with me what I saw, or So basically, when this earthquake happened, I was not in Japan. I was in Libya shooting. I mean, the Libyan war for magazines, and it was a deadline. I just got news that there's something happening in Japan, and of course, as I'm Japanese, earthquake doesn't sound abnormal. So it's okay, again earthquake, and I finally saw the news, and it was like something different, something very immense. And then I just called the editor, like, can I go back? And he said, yeah, you should go. And so I left Libya and I reached Japan. And then, if you can, maybe if you're French, if maybe you can just think about you going back to Paris. If you're American, maybe you're thinking about you going back to New York where you work, or like in Chicago or San Francisco. And then when I arrived, the most shocking thing was when I was in Tokyo. And then Tokyo is basically a kind of crazy place, it's so bright. I saw many people, neon signs, cars, so busy. And basically it's the city doesn't sleep, like kind of like New York. And by the time when I arrived, there was no light, no one, so dark, so silent. That was so scary already. And then I arrived at the airport like 5 o'clock. So I was thinking, I have to ride a train at the rush hour. So I was thinking my big suitcase, and then maybe people see me like, oh, why this guy is having this big suitcase in this rush hour? But there was no one on the train. So that's the first thing I saw, something very strange. And the next day, I went up to the north, or the tsunami-affected region. And then after a week, 10 days, I reached Fukushima. And then what I saw was really a ghost town, abandoned, like in one night. And then the most strange thing was it was so silent, no sound. If you live in the city, or if you live in anywhere, maybe here at night it's kind of silent, but you don't actually have much experience, I think, that you're in the situation where there is no sound. And then it sounded like a horror movie, because everyone disappeared in one night, and then you can actually still feel the kind of traces of the life, but actually no one there. And also, radiation level was quite high. I had this like a small Geiger counter, which finally broke when I went close to a nuclear plant, and then you don't feel anything, but it's so weird. Because radiation, like you cannot see, you cannot smell, so but you have to be very careful. With really weird experience, and then so it's like, and then I also know some people who are from Fukushima and they live in Tokyo, and then of course when they went back, they saw the kind of sudden death of their home. Yeah, and then. And then what happens like after they abandon this places? It's like I saw like animals going around, cows, like dead cows, like hundreds, and it smells very bad in just 2 weeks. And then of course there are many thieves, coming to the region, and then I try to steal something, broke into the house because there's no one. So it's really like a crazy situation. And now what's happening is, the government, of course, they want some area, they want people to come back. One is because maybe they don't want to spend money to keep paying, for the people. And but also those old people who used to live in this place for years, they don't want to leave. And actually, many like old people, like elders, like 70, 80 years old people, like they actually died because of stress, because they evacuated. And they, in the countryside, like, well, you have a big house. It's not like, you have to pay 1,000 euro for rent, like for 20 square meter in Paris. So like they used to, live in the big house with relaxed atmosphere, and then now they're put into this like only a 10 square meter, like temporary housing. And a lot of people actually died for the stress. So like old people actually want to go back. And as they started going back for some areas, I'm not very close to the nuclear plant, but the problem is like now I go to the region, I see only few places, but I see only old people, elder people, no young people. And some places schools are open, just in case kids coming back, but only few, not many coming back. So like I don't see the actual future of the region when I see no kids. And then there's no future, and then that's actually what's happening now. And then now after 3 years, still like 130,000 people somewhere in a temporary housing, or they just left, they cannot go back. And then we lost how much? $110 billion, up to now. And we don't know what's going on from now, because I think we need another 20, 30, 40 years to finally control the reactor. And then we still have this we're kind of living in the fear that reactor number 4 is about to collapse. It's been 3 years same, and every time we have earthquake we feel like it's gonna collapse soon, and it was okay. So we are basically checking Twitter or news almost every day. And then but still still in the city, people trying to get back their life. So in the city, like Tokyo, it's only 250 kilometers from Fukushima plant, and then the city is becoming kind of normal now. And then people actually started forgetting what happened. We never forgot, but you cannot keep living in the state of emergency. And even in Fukushima, inside the region, just some 50 kilometers from the reactor, there's a big city, Fukushima City, where the radiation level is quite high. If it's before the nuclear accident, it should be that level. It should be a controlled area, like inside this nuclear energy plant, and it's much higher than that. So, and the people are not wearing a mask anymore, because you don't want to wear a mask all the time for 3 years. And kids are just going to school, and then now they started playing outside. So when I every time I go, because I'm Japanese, but I'm also outsider. I'm not from Fukushima. I'm from Tokyo, even if it's very close. But it's so weird. Whenever I go back, I wear a mask. I'm trying to be careful, but people are not careful anymore. So I'm always wondering what's going to happen for these people. And now some reports say that more kids are getting thyroid cancers. So that's what I'm seeing in these 3 years.
Everyone, I hope, realizes that if the reactor had not been Fukushima, but had been the reactor over here at Shino, this event wouldn't be taking place, because this would be within the exclusion zone. And all that wine that we drank, that delicious wine from the Loire Valley that we drank, no one would be drinking it. If it had been the reactor at Blaye, that would be the end of Bordeaux wine and the end of cognac, two of my favorites. So that's just to put this in perspective. So the other thing is that there isn't a single country on earth, in terms of financial cases, that has insurance that covers this magnitude of calamity. The normal figure is something like 13 to 15 billion to cover expenses. In other words, there's insurance to cover a little event, but there isn't insurance to cover a major event. Just no insurance at all, which is perhaps something we could talk about in that challenge section. So now we are truly lucky that Senator Joannou has joined us, and I'm passing the mic to her.
Il marche? Merci beaucoup. Oui, il marche. Thank you. Merci et pardon de ce retard. Alors, on m'a demandé d'intervenir sur ces deux sujets, le nucléaire et les gaz de schiste. En fait, ils posent deux questions radicalement différentes. Le gaz de schiste, ça a été très bien expliqué tout à l'heure par Sylvain Laporte. Le gaz de schiste, on est toujours dans des analyses sur des questions économiques. Est-ce que c'est rentable, pas rentable? Est-ce qu'il y en a beaucoup ou pas beaucoup? Alors, on peut très longuement parler des estimations qui ont été faites par l'Agence internationale de l'énergie et de la réalité, effectivement, du potentiel dans dans les quelques pays, nos différents pays européens. On parle énormément des techniques de fracturation, mais en fait, on ne se posait jamais la question de base. Et juste dans cette salle, j'imagine que vous êtes tous, par définition, assez intéressés et de fait assez avertis des questions écologiques, mais qui connaît la différence de température avec l'ère glaciaire? Est-ce que quelqu'un a une petite idée dans la salle? Oui. C'est ça, on est à plus 4,5 degrés par rapport à l'ère glaciaire. Or, les dernières estimations du GIEC, si vous les avez bien lues, on est sur une trajectoire à l'horizon 2100, donc un horizon où mes enfants, et en tout cas mes petits-enfants, en espérant que mes enfants en aient d'ailleurs, seront en vie. C'est plus 4 degrés aujourd'hui. Donc, autant vous dire que c'est sur un potentiel d'événements à travers le monde qu'on ne connaît pas. On n'a aucune idée. Voilà, on a une petite idée de ce qui s'est passé pendant l'ère glaciaire, mais on n'a aucune idée de ce qui se passerait à plus 4 degrés Celsius en 2100, c'est-à-dire demain, par rapport à aujourd'hui. Donc la seule et la vraie question qui compte aujourd'hui, c'est pourquoi exploiter des gaz de schiste, alors que justement, on a pris comme engagement, la main sur le cœur, de réduire nos émissions de gaz à effet de serre. En France, typiquement, effectivement, j'ai entendu souvent que les gaz de schiste, ça nous permettrait de faire des économies sur nos 12 milliards de factures énergétiques, en termes de gaz en tout cas, que nous importons chaque année. Sauf que la vraie question aujourd'hui, c'est que la priorité, ça doit être de réduire justement ces importations de gaz et ce besoin en énergie fossile, et pas de les remplacer par une autre forme d'énergie fossile. Donc, toute la recherche, tout l'argent qu'on va aller dépenser dans des techniques de fracturation différentes ou dans d'autres méthodologies, c'est de l'argent que finalement on va détourner de l'objectif que normalement on s'est fixé collectivement, et vraiment la main sur le cœur, parce que vous pouvez interroger n'importe quelle politique aujourd'hui sur l'échiquier, tous vous diront « Ah oui, il faut réduire les émissions de gaz à effet de serre, on a pris des engagements. » Mais par contre, si vous interrogez les mêmes sur les gaz de schiste, en privé, parce qu'en public ça peut être un peu différent, mais en privé, vous avez une grande majorité qui vous dira « Oui, il faut les exploiter ». Donc dans une contradiction totale. Donc la vraie question des gaz de schiste, c'est celle-ci. Et ce qui explique d'ailleurs mon opposition très simple à l'exploitation des gaz de schiste, tout particulièrement en France, c'est que si nous exploitons des gaz de schiste en France, plutôt que de remplacer nos importations de gaz, on augmentera mathématiquement nos émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Après, il y a des pays pour lesquels, à la limite, la question peut se poser de savoir s'ils doivent remplacer du charbon par du gaz. Ça, c'est un autre sujet. Mais ces pays auraient plutôt aussi intérêt à franchir le pas directement, de savoir comment remplacer de l'énergie fossile par de l'énergie non fossile. Sur la question du nucléaire, elle est une question radicalement différente. On entend souvent des oppositions au nucléaire pour des raisons dites écologiques. Si on fait un bilan purement écologique du nucléaire, on pourrait trouver que ce bilan est relativement bon par rapport à d'autres énergies. Mais le vrai sujet Le seul sujet, c'est celui qui vient d'être brillamment exposé par du vécu, c'est quel niveau de risque on accepte. Et tout le paradoxe en France, c'est que finalement, nos concitoyens aujourd'hui n'ont jamais eu à se prononcer sur ce niveau de risque qu'ils acceptent ou pas. Il y a bien, quand on installe des centrales nucléaires, moi j'étais sous-préfet quand on a ouvert la dernière centrale nucléaire en France à Civaux. Donc j'étais en tant que sous-préfet chargée effectivement de la concertation locale avec l'opérateur, de la mise en place des mesures en cas d'incident. Et j'étais toujours assez étonnée parce qu'effectivement, on a bien des mesures d'information, mais in fine, globalement, la population française, on ne lui a jamais demandé est-ce que vous arbitrez en faveur de cette prise de risque ou pas? Parce que c'est un arbitrage possible. On peut tout à fait dire, effectivement, écoutez, oui, on sait très bien, on a vu Fukushima, on connaît le niveau de risque, et finalement, on l'accepte parce qu'on préfère continuer à conserver un certain niveau de confort, parce que le bilan écologique n'est peut-être pas aussi mauvais, effectivement, enfin, n'est pas si mauvais. Donc on accepte ce niveau de risque. Mais il pourrait tout à fait, effectivement, avoir une position différente et dire non, aujourd'hui, on n'accepte plus ce niveau de risque. Cette question-là, on ne l'a jamais vraiment posée de manière totalement objective et simple. Quand on a lancé le programme nucléaire, on n'a pas posé la question. Et aujourd'hui, vous ne trouverez pas non plus d'ailleurs un politique, je pense, qui voudrait poser la question. Parce que derrière ça, il y a une autre question qui se pose pour savoir si on garde du nucléaire ou si on ne garde pas du nucléaire. C'est de savoir, est-ce qu'on pense que l'avenir, et ça c'est un vrai point de clivage politique extrêmement intéressant, est-ce que l'avenir est fait de plus de consommation d'énergie, en tout cas en France, ou pas? À l'échelle mondiale, vous savez, vous connaissez les perspectives, d'ici 25-30 ans, c'est plus un tiers de consommation d'énergie à l'échelle mondiale. Mais en France, on a un niveau de développement, on a un niveau de confort, apprécié de tous d'ailleurs, manifestement. On a un vrai niveau de confort, donc on pourrait se dire finalement, l'augmentation de la consommation d'énergie, elle n'est pas du tout évidente. In fine, si vous dites qu'à terme, on consommera toujours plus d'énergie, par exemple pour développer le véhicule électrique, dans ces conditions, vous conservez toujours 58 réacteurs, peut-être qu'on peut en retirer quelques-uns comme Fessenheim, mais vous conservez toujours grosso modo 58 réacteurs et vous développez la part des énergies renouvelables. Donc vous baissez mathématiquement la proportion du nucléaire, mais vous conservez toujours autant quasiment de réacteurs nucléaires en France. Si vous partez du postulat inverse, qu'il faut réduire évidemment la consommation d'énergie, dans ces conditions, vous vous engagez potentiellement, ça peut être un choix politique, dans une sortie du nucléaire. Donc le vrai débat sur effectivement quelle part de risque et d'incertitude on peut accepter, il ne se pose que pour le nucléaire. Vraiment pour le gaz de schiste, je trouve que le débat est politiquement biaisé. D'ailleurs, c'est très étonnant parce qu'il y a 2-3 ans, le gaz de schiste, tout le monde disait « Ah non, surtout pas de gaz de schiste en France ». Maintenant, je peux vous dire qu'il y a des pressions, notamment politiques, autour de ce sujet, qui se sont traduites d'ailleurs très récemment par un débat totalement biaisé autour du principe de précaution au sein du Sénat, autour de ce débat totalement biaisé autour du principe de précaution qui visait très clairement à le remettre en question au nom du principe d'innovation. Je ne sais pas trop ce que c'est que le principe d'innovation, mais passons. On a eu 44 sénateurs qui ont voté contre cette attaque du principe de précaution. Et derrière tout ça, on avait tous les débats, effectivement, autour et du gaz de schiste, même si je vous le dis, ce n'est pas quand même complètement corrélé, et d'autres sujets comme les OGM. Donc il y a une évolution politique importante en France et en Europe autour de ces sujets, mais je distingue bien les deux questions.
Thank you very much, Senator. And you have the last word, but I have a question. So, as I understand it, you are opposed to gaz de schiste essentially because it puts CO2 in the air. That's the reason. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you think that nuclear is that the French and many other people are not realistically looking at the risk of nuclear. Is that correct? They are not taking that risk seriously. Is that correct?
That's quite correct, yes.
Okay. So what we have is an interesting consensus on this panel, which is that gaz de schiste doesn't really work anyway because it's too expensive to produce it, and there is nowhere near as much as the people who are touting it were claiming. But it's just as well, because if it did exist in the quantities that the promoters claimed, we would all be cooked from global warming in a few years. So we're lucky that there isn't, that it's not an honest story. And as far as nuclear, there seems to be, well, I don't know if there's a consensus because we haven't all discussed it, but it is certainly clear that most people are not facing the fact that they are taking an uninsurable risk with nuclear. And that uninsurable risk doesn't actually exist in any other business. Every other business has some kind of liability insurance that covers the maximum damage that it can inflict. Nuclear does not. So every one of us in this room is carrying personally the risk of something going completely haywire at a nuclear station. So I don't know, there should have been an opportunity for discussion with the audience, but now, are there any questions from the audience? Anybody have a comment or question? There's a lady over there.
Coming from the water policy group to just bring up the question about the issue of water resources. I'm reminded of when we had the debate about the ozone layer, and I used the word debate tongue-in-cheek intentionally. But I remember in the United States there was a strategy from the scientific community to actually present testimony before the U.S. Congress from the Wigglesworth Chair on Dermatology from Harvard University about the human impacts of the hole in the ozone producing melanoma, and they chose to show photographs of 14-year-old Australian children with melanoma to try to connect this obscure issue in the stratosphere with something that human beings could connect with. So on both the nuclear and the shale gas issues, there are very immediate water resource arguments that could perhaps be utilized to help to engage a more conscious and active public in being both scientifically informed and making decisions in a democratic or engaged way that have to do with this. So I wanted to ask, in France, what was there in the summer of the heat waves? You know, the
2003.
The Germans turned off their reactors because they have regulations about putting the cooling water, the hot cooling water, back into the rivers. In France, you broke your own laws because of the dependency on nuclear power. The second side of the issue is that in the climate science community, those who understand the trajectory that we are on, that we are impoverishing humanity writ large if we continue with our reliance on fossil fuel, are looking at what is the technological fix. So to what extent are you even considering geoengineering? And this means both, you know, carbon capture and storage technologies, solar radiation management. You know, in the UK...
May I interrupt you?
Okay.
Because I think that's enough for that question. We're not considering those issues at all on this panel. This panel was strictly about the financial risks of shale gas and shale oil and the uninsurable risk of nuclear. We're not talking about any other topic. Thank you. Are there other questions?
Oui, je voudrais poser une question à Madame Joanneau. Voilà, je fais partie de ces citoyens qui s'interrogent beaucoup sur le grand marché transatlantique et ses implications justement sur la pénétration éventuellement des grands groupes sur les gaz de schiste. Et j'aimerais savoir quelle est un peu l'opinion politique dominante à l'heure actuelle, parce que ça ne fait pas partie du débat public et je regrette beaucoup.
À propos du traité transatlantique ou à propos des gaz de schiste?
S'agissant de notre sujet, c'est les implications du grand marché transatlantique, si vous voulez malheureusement souligner, pour les accords.
Alors, sur le traité transatlantique, effectivement, tel qu'il est conçu actuellement, je rassure notre modérateur, c'est en lien avec le sujet indirectement, mais c'est en lien avec le sujet, parce qu'effectivement, un des énormes points d'interrogation et d'inquiétude même dans ce marché, c'est que finalement, il revient à aligner les normes sanitaires et les normes environnementales sur la norme la plus basse en réalité, pas la norme européenne qui est plus élevée, mais la norme américaine, et ce qui effectivement serait une porte ouverte à des méthodes d'extraction et d'exploitation des gaz de schiste. Là, aujourd'hui, il y a dans la classe politique, nous, on a clairement pris position aujourd'hui contre ce traité, justement pour les normes à cause du non-respect, ou en tout cas des moindres normes environnementales et sanitaires, et puis aussi pour la question du respect des données personnelles. Mais en réalité, dans la classe politique, il n'y a aucun lien qui est fait entre la question des gaz de schiste et le traité transatlantique. Et puis, il est plutôt vu de manière positive. Enfin, dans la classe politique, la majorité de la classe politique est plutôt ouverte sur le sujet du traité transatlantique.
Pour une précision, excusez-moi, c'est qu'il n'y a pas que la question des normes, il y a un point très précis dans le TAFTA, donc dans les accords de libre-échange, qui stipule que le TAFTA a également pour objectif de faciliter et de promouvoir l'accès aux ressources minières de façon extensive. Autrement dit, c'est un argument qui peut être plaidé auprès des fameux tribunaux arbitraux qu'instaure le TAFTA. Concrètement, si jamais on refuse l'accès à des ressources minières, à ce moment-là, un État pourrait être poursuivi par une entreprise qui cherche à le faire pour entrave au commerce.